Okay, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of the Daily Sib. And it's the first episode where we've got a live BSL interpretation, but more importantly, we've got Edward Richards, who is my friend and colleague from Open Inclusion, where we work as panel leads. So first of all, I would like to bring Ed in and say hello, Ed.
Hello, Martin. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. And I want to mention that the person signing is Tony, as it says at the bottom, Tony McCarthy. And Ed and Tony always gang up on me about having a tan and flying around the world all the time. And we have a good joke and banter about this. Cool. So we'll start off with Ed to let us have an introduction. Just tell everybody watching a little bit about you, please.
Okay, so I'm born deaf, and obviously I've grown up using BSL as my main communication, but I'm from Southeast London as well, but now I live in North London. I work with Open Inclusion and Inclusive Fruit. It's a media company, and we focus on access in the media.
Brilliant. And would you say your profession generally is a designer? Is that right?
Yeah. I do branding, graphics, that sort of thing. Whatever client requests, really. Then I work with them to try and achieve their vision, what they want for their sort of brand or how they communicate to their sort of buying public.
So it sort of sits under marketing, would you say?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. About communication and about access to information and understanding services and what's being offered and what the company do and how they can provide that service. And so I focus on that for clients for access.
And thank you, because that's the perfect connection to my first proper question, which is about communication. So obviously, when someone is deaf or can't hear, has a hearing impairment, communication is more difficult, to say an understatement. So what's been your experience as a person, but also generally for the community that you advocate and support? What are the difficulties, but the solutions around communication?
Yeah, I think I was born in a different era, shall we say, and there was a strong connection to be oral, to not use sign language. We weren't encouraged to use sign language at all. So back then, my parents sort of followed the sort of medical expertise at the time to say that it's better if I was brought up orally. That means to speak rather than sign. And because of that, there was a lot of barriers, because I couldn't communicate with my family. It was only on a one-to-one basis that it was successful. But in a group setting, I just missed information all the time. And sometimes I thought that my mum I thought she had a dent in her arm, because I was always just digging her in the arm going, what are they talking about? What are they talking about? What are they talking about? I would ask questions and she would say, important. And that would really frustrate me. And I would, anyone else I would ask in the family, ask what they said, and they'd try and explain, but they wouldn't get the full information. And so at school, I was raised in an oral environment, again, not allowed to sign. And I missed a lot of the information. And the teacher, obviously, at that time would also turn around and draw right on the chalkboard. And so I couldn't see their lips. I couldn't understand what was happening. I couldn't follow information. Very frustrating for me. And I used to get tinnitus, which is a ringing in the ears through that frustration. And that breakdown in communication all the time was just really very stressful. So when I finally went to a deaf club, and it's the Friends of the Young Deaf, it was called, I went to Amsterdam in my, I think I was 17, and we went with a group, and I was shocked to see everybody signing, communicating with each other, and I thought, that's what I need to do. That's what I need to learn. A fantastic experience for me was in Sydney in Australia when I went with a deaf club, and I really just immersed myself into, I was 25 then, and my signing just improved, and from then until now I only use sign language. And it felt like, you know, there was a bomb inside me that went off, and once I had sign language I could ask all the questions, I could get all the information. And then it became just much more simple for me to sign and ask questions and information. And I think what we don't understand is when you try and lip read, some deaf community members are partially hearing, they can hear a bit. But with a BSL user, the cognitive process of information is very different. When you hear a piece of information, you can hear the words, hear the tone, hear all that, and that makes you understand. In sign language, very different, because the cognitive way of understanding is very different. Especially when someone's talking and the topic's moved on, I'm just processing and I've only understood a smaller part. With an interpreter, it's so natural because I can take the information in straight away, and that means I can follow more what's being spoken about, and then I can respond, and it's much better for me. And if someone is talking or the interpreter then aid me and then respond for me, and I think as a deaf person I live in a visual world, and lip reading isn't visual enough. My brain doesn't process that information. If I can see it in a picture, in a visual way, then my brain can process it much better. And that sort of is who I am, I like to think sarcastic and funny and witty, and that comes across, hopefully it's in a good way. Hopefully that comes across. No, yeah,
Of course it does.
Obviously, because of that side of my personality comes through, then people can get to know me, Edward. And I think it's the benefit of understanding that deaf people need information in BSL, and their lives can improve much faster because they have their access to information. Growing up in a deaf family, where both parents are deaf, a young deaf person born into that family has language acquisition much sooner. They grow up using sign language as their first language. And their English become even better as well because they can learn English via the BSL medium. And a lot of the time, the grammar in English is very difficult for deaf people, BSL users, to understand because the word order is different in sign language and in English. And it becomes much better. And I think what we see now is more and more teachers of the deaf who are deaf themselves, who are sign language users, which is fantastic because children have access to information in their native language. And it also shows a role model for the young deaf person that there's a deaf BSL user who's got a job. There's many different schools, Heathlands, Oak Lodge, that are doing fantastic work with students by having tutors. And I realised that as me growing up through the education system, I didn't really have any role models. I didn't have any until much later in my life, and probably until I was 25, see role models of deaf people having careers and, you know, getting on in life.
Yeah, thank you. That's really amazing. What I took away is how empowering BSL is for you and for other people as well, and the importance of role models. I totally agree with. So I had a thought that, like, when I, as a wheelchair user, engage with society, I know there are people and times where they're scared of doing or saying the wrong thing to me. For example, I can't lift my arm out to shake hands very well, so there's always a really awkward moment when someone reaches to shake my hand and I can't quite reach them. So there's a lot of fear about social awkwardness. And I realized when I was writing the sort of promotional copy and the description of our interview today around deaf, and I used the word hearing impaired, and I used that in the first opening question, I was worrying that I was saying the wrong word, and I didn't want to cause offense to the deaf community. And I know there's something around small d and capital D on deaf as well. So I just wondered, for me and for people watching, could you explain what are the correct words that the community prefer, and a little bit around the small d and capital D of deaf?
I think big D really means culturally deaf. And what that means is they're native BSL users, they grew up using BSL, they have a link with the deaf community, they attend regular deaf events, they go to museums and galleries and interact with deaf guides that are there, BSL guides. And that also means that I can interact with them as a guide myself and they can interact with me, which means they become deaf community because they live their life through the youth cultural use of BSL. Small d, I suppose I don't identify as a small d, I identify as a big D. I think the small d is people that use more oral, maybe use lip reading as a way to communicate better, don't naturally use BSL as their first communication method.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they live in a different world to the big D, culturally deaf people. It's a choice because you can learn sign language, obviously, with your hard of hearing or hearing impaired. And it's people's choice, but they're still part of the deaf community. People that become deafened later in life, I mean, I think I spoke recently to a young woman, actually, who became deaf, I think at the age of 11, actually. She identified herself as deaf.
Was that Ella?
Yes, yeah. I thought
Yeah.
she was very interesting. Fantastic conversation. I was really amazed by her. She was deafened, but she recognised and identified as a deaf person. She can speak, she can use sign language. She's only 11 years old, but she lives in a hearing world for that time and then suddenly became deaf. She didn't identify herself as deafened, she identified herself as deaf. Some older deaf people who say, I'm not deaf, I'm deafened. And it becomes a choice thing. It's fine. The community accepts those people as deaf and hard of hearing. I'm on the spectrum of deaf cultural.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. So I think when we move into, in a minute, into COVID-19 for your community and beyond, there's probably quite a few bits that are very important to talk about. But I want to just touch upon work briefly. So could you just tell us a little bit more about your work, but how you've maybe had to adapt or change things, and how you've gone about doing that so that you're able to do your work and progress in your career?
Yeah, of course. I mean, with the COVID situation right now, I suppose the things I've had to adapt is
Yeah.
it's really become challenging, because 50% of my time in work, I'm out meeting people, meeting clients, doing presentations and things like that, meeting you at Open Inclusion and having our discussions.
Mm.
All that's changed. We've gone over to a digital format for that. I think I get digital fatigue. You know, my eyes really ache looking at a screen all the time, and it becomes all day, whereas before I'd have breaks from that.
Mm.
And also, I suppose I've had to learn how to fit breaks in to actually stop looking at a screen.
Yeah.
When I work with Tony, my interpreter, we make phone calls with clients, we're using Zoom. We have to sort of monitor our time and sort of say 40 minutes maximum. That just stop for a minute and just switch off the screen, and we have to go away, both of us, and get some eye rest. It's really impact on my life as well, because the best way, I think, is the new normal. How they're going to achieve this, I'm not really sure how that's going to happen. What the best way is, I don't know, because I think the deaf community need to be face to face, obviously, for sign language. We need to sort of do each other. Sign language is very 3D as well. So in real time, in face to face, it's much easier to understand. But this is very flat screen. Like today, you're over on the left and Tony's over on the right, and I'm squished in the middle, and there's not enough signing space. It's become very difficult for us to try and manage that.
Yeah.
Tony and I, to understand each other. But remember that phonetic. Oh, the TV program.
Dynasty.
Dynasty. Okay, sorry, that was the interpreter. Dynasty. This looks like the opening credits for Dynasty. Sorry, I didn't pick up, but that's the interpreter. It looks like I'm on the TV program, and we're all going to slide off in a minute, and new people are going to arrive. Yeah, I mean, with the advent of Zoom and Google Hangout and Microsoft Team, it's become difficult to use, because each of them use different formats, different screen sizes, and the way it works. You know, Tony becomes tinier and tinier if there's more people in a meeting. I can't see him. I have to make him big. Then he has to make me larger on the screen. Then I can't see the other people. But we're sort of, that relationship about seeing someone's face gets lost.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to interact with people. But that digital side of things has become quite difficult. I've had to learn to rearrange, screens in a different way for each different application. I try and get Tony to be pinned in the middle, as it were, and then other people around him, so that I can look at them in face to face while I'm speaking. And then also there's one where the person is speaking, the border of the box highlights. So that switches around as different people interact. And it becomes really difficult for me to try and follow. And then sometimes there's one actually that sort of zooms in on the person that's speaking. So Tony disappears and I can't see him for a second, and I have to make sure I pinned him to the screen. So lots of learning curve.
And someone's actually just written up on Facebook. I'm going to bring it up very quickly just to show. It's going to block the signing, so I'll take it down again. They're saying to me that, could you please change appropriate terminology from hearing impaired to hard of hearing? We all felt your terminology is very offended. And I don't know, but I think Nadia, yeah. But what's Ed's perspective of that?
I'm not a fan of hearing impairment because it's a bit too loose. I prefer to say deaf and let that cover the spectrum of deaf people, deaf community. But it's about communication. If somebody have different methods of communication, oral, sign language, looped, hearing aid, it's important what they want. It's hearing impaired seems not ideal word at all.
Yeah,
I know lots of deaf people don't like that terminology.
I can understand that.
It's very medical as well. It comes from it's a medical term.
Because interestingly, when I learned about the social model of disability when I worked for Scope, they used the word impairment for the medical side, which actually does agree with what you've just said, Ed. And then the disabled people is disabled by the barriers of society, the environment, the attitudes, and the policies. So yeah, it's. I also wonder if words can create more barriers, or political correctness can create more barriers than having a discussion about the other solutions. It's a balance. From my opinion, it's a balance.
Yes. Sometimes it's about asking the individual, what's your preferred terminology?
Yes, exactly.
What would you like what words would you like me to use? Do you want me to use deaf, deafened, hard of hearing? What is your preferred terminology? And that then clears up any issues.
Yes.
If you just say they're all hearing impaired, then I think everyone in that room might explode.
Yeah. To say the least.
Trying to label everyone as the same,
yeah, of course,
doesn't help. I mean, wheelchair users are not labelled in that way. I don't think it's very different for. Sorry, the interpreter needs to clarify. One day you're going to be able to get on a plane in your wheelchair, I hope. Literally in it, rather than a ramp up to a plane door. I guess that's going to be an important change for you. Coming back to the terminology, whatever terminology you're happy with is the terminology I would use for you. And I guess the way to do that is by asking.
So I'm conscious of time, but I guess the last question really is framed within the current COVID-19 and the challenges that is presenting. But I imagine it's maybe exaggerated some of the barriers and the difficulties that were existing before COVID-19 anyway. But I just want the viewers watching to have an understanding of 2 or 3 issues that the community is facing at the moment.
I think the first and most important thing is access to information. The English government have really embarrassed themselves. There was a campaign called #Where's the Interpreter?
Yeah.
Because whenever the government spoke, there was no BSO interpreter. The daily briefings didn't contain any BSO interpretation. And it was embarrassing for the English government. Even in Scotland, Wales, the Welsh Assembly, New Zealand had, Australia had, lots of other countries had a live BSO interpretation. Because this is an emergency situation and information needs to be given to the public.
Yeah.
But England, we didn't do that. And I don't understand why. I think it's key to, I mean, really, they're breaking the Equalities Act, to be honest with you. It's vital for us to have access to information and all the nuances and statistics that were, logistics that were going on. We didn't have information. I think the next thing was probably masks. Wearing masks then limited communication for lots of deaf people, hard of hearing people, because they couldn't obviously see lip pattern, they couldn't lip read. I know there were some masks created with windows in. I found them a bit odd because that sort of became sort of non-medically approved. So how are they helping the person themselves? And deaf hard of hearing people were really important for them. But I think one country developed a transparent entire mask, so you could see the entire face. I don't know if that was going to be rolled out, but that would be fantastic for the deaf community. That means that deaf people, BSL users, hard of hearing people could actually lip read. The aim originally was for children, because children were becoming scared of seeing someone approach them with a full mask on. And because they then were able to change that so they could see a smile or something, that encouraged children to not be scared. I think the third thing that's really happened in this COVID situation, if you imagine being deaf and going to hospital or needing any emergency treatment or an emergency happened, how would you, having access to something? Sorry, the screen's freezing a bit. Yeah, so paramedics, for example, and ambulance workers, how are they able to communicate with BSL users? And then, you know, reverting back to the old system of writing things down when someone's in a stressful situation, not very clear. And also, you know, going to hospital, you know, all the PPE equipment that hospital staff were supposed to be wearing, you know, it became very nerve-wracking for deaf people. Thankfully, that you know, people have been able to return home. I know one of my friends had a really awful experience, but they're home now. So, yeah, it's really made it difficult.
Cool. So we're going to wrap up, but one thing is, how can people follow you or get in touch if they have any questions, particularly people watching the replay of this later? But also, just one more opportunity, is there anything else that you would like to say before we finish?
You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Edward CED, all one word.
Was that CED?
Yes, CED, Charlie Echo Delta.
Edward CED on Twitter. Yeah. And yeah, any final thoughts before we finish?
What I would love to see is society understand the need for access to information in BSL, because, you know, people going out after lockdown is closed down, there's going to be a lot of new things happening, and what we want is that information to be given to us in BSL we can understand, and also more people to learn sign language rather than just seeing us waving our arms around and looking like fools. It'd be nice if lots of people learn sign language so we can communicate with each other.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you, Tony, for interpreting. Big thank you to Ed for your very useful and helpful insights. I think you'll have educated lots of people into the general considerations, but also the specific with COVID-19 at the moment as well. So thank you for that. And a big thank you to everybody watching both live now and for the comments, and watching the replay later on today as well. And I will be back tomorrow, same time, same place, for the next episode of the Daily Sib. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.